Claire Morgan had learned something during her years working in technology. The louder someone was about their importance, the less they usually understood about what kept a company alive. She had seen it many times. Executives celebrated successful launches. Managers gave speeches about innovation. Sales teams talked about growth numbers and future plans. But behind every presentation, every contract, and every expensive office, there were invisible systems quietly keeping everything running. And Claire was one of the people who made sure those systems never failed. At Northvale Systems, almost nobody knew how important her work really was. Most employees thought Claire was just another IT contractor, the woman they called when a computer froze, the person who fixed connection problems, the technician who appeared, quietly, solved issues, and disappeared before anyone remembered her name. Claire never corrected them. She didn't need recognition. For almost 6 years, she had walked through the same glass office building every morning, carrying the same black laptop bag and drinking the same plain coffee from the small cafe across the street. She wore simple clothes, no designer brands, no expensive jewelry, no signs that she managed some of the most critical infrastructure supporting a multi-million-dollar company. To most people, she looked ordinary, and Claire preferred it that way. That morning, the Northvale headquarters was unusually busy. Employees moved quickly through the lobby. Phones were ringing. Elevators opened and closed constantly. The company was preparing for an important investor meeting. At the center of all the activity was Jared Collins, the company's CEO. Jared was known for 2 things: his ability to grow the company and his belief that he was always the smartest person in the room. He walked through the office with confidence, surrounded by managers who laughed at every joke and agreed with every opinion. Claire saw him pass her desk without looking up. She didn't expect him to notice her. He rarely did. Around 10 in the morning, Claire received an alert. A problem had started inside the company's main data system. It wasn't visible yet. No employees had complained. No customers had reported issues, but Claire saw the warning signs: a cooling imbalance, a network delay, a small error that could become a major failure if ignored. She immediately contacted the operations team. "There's a pressure increase in the East Server section," she said. One of the managers responded casually, "Can it wait? We're in the middle of the investor presentation." Claire looked at the monitoring screen. "No. If we wait, we could have a larger problem in a few hours." The manager sighed. "Claire, the system has been running for years. Don't overreact." She paused. That sentence was familiar. People often believed that because something worked, it required no effort. They never saw the problems that were prevented before they happened. Claire checked the system again. Then she made the decision herself. She adjusted the cooling distribution and rerouted part of the network load. Within minutes, the warning disappeared. The problem was solved. Nobody noticed. Nobody thanked her. That afternoon, Jared held a meeting with senior executives. Claire was not invited. But she walked past the conference room while carrying documents and heard part of the conversation. "We avoided another potential outage today," one manager said. Jared smiled. "That's why we have a great operations team." Claire stopped for a moment. She waited. Maybe someone would mention the person who fixed it. Nobody did. She continued walking. She wasn't angry. She was used to it. But she remembered. Not because she wanted revenge. Because she understood something. People who don't know the value of something often realize it only after losing it. 3 days later, Jared announced changes to the company structure. The company wanted to reduce expenses. Several external contracts would be reviewed. Claire already knew what that meant. Her contract was one of them. She attended the meeting because she was required to. Jared stood at the front of the room. "We need a more efficient approach," he said. "We cannot continue paying outside specialists when we can bring these roles internally." Several employees nodded. Claire sat quietly near the back. Jared looked through the list, then his eyes stopped on her. "Claire Morgan." The room became quiet. "Your contract will end this week," Some employees looked surprised. Others immediately looked away. Claire simply nodded. Understood. Jared seemed almost disappointed by her calm reaction. You know, Claire, this is business. Don't take it personally. She looked at him. I'm not. He leaned back. I hope you understand that companies need people who contribute beyond basic technical tasks. A few people in the room became uncomfortable. They knew the comment was unnecessary. But nobody spoke. Claire looked around the room. The same people she had helped. The same systems she had protected. The same company she had quietly supported for years. Then she looked back at Jared. I understand. She signed the termination documents. No argument. No emotional speech. No threat. She simply packed her things. Her desk was almost empty because Claire never decorated it. The only personal item she had was a small silver key attached to her laptop bag. Jared noticed it as she walked away. That's it? He asked. Claire stopped. Yes. You don't want to say anything? She looked at him for a moment. Then she smiled slightly. No. You made your decision. And she left. Jared watched her disappear through the office doors. He felt certain he had removed a replaceable employee. He had no idea that within the next 24 hours, the company would discover something far more dangerous. Claire Morgan had never been just the person fixing their computers. She was the person making sure their entire operation could continue. And now, for the first time in 6 years, Northvale Systems would have to run without her. The first morning after Claire Morgan left Northvale Systems, everything looked normal. That was what made everyone underestimate the situation. The office lights turned. OnDot employees arrived with coffee in their hands. Meetings started on time. Executives walked through the halls believing yesterday's decision had saved the company money. Jared Collins felt especially confident. He sat in his office, reviewing the cost report that showed how much the company would save by ending Claire's contract. To him, it was proof that he had made a smart business decision. She was just maintaining old systems, Jared told his assistant. We need people who can help us grow, not people who only protect the past. His assistant nodded quietly. She had learned that disagreeing with Jared usually created more problems than solving them. But while Jared was celebrating the decision, the first warning signs had already appeared. At 9:20 a.m., employees began reporting slow network connections. At first, nobody was worried. A few computers were restarted. A few tickets were opened. The IT department assumed it was a temporary issue. Then, the security system started failing. Employees who normally had access to certain areas found their cards were no longer working. A technician checked the system and frowned. I don't understand. The permissions are delayed. Can you fix it? A manager asked. We're trying. That answer became more common throughout the day. We're trying. By afternoon, several important clients noticed delays in Northvale's services.customer support team started receiving calls. Executives started asking questions, but nobody had answers, because Claire had always been the person who noticed problems before they became disasters. She knew which alerts mattered. She knew which small changes could prevent major failures. The new team only knew how to react after something went wrong. At 6:45 p.m., the server room temperature began rising. The cooling system sent out warnings. The overnight engineer looked at the screen and immediately called his supervisor. We have a temperature issue in the east server area. Can you restart the cooling system? We already tried. A pause followed. Then contact the vendor. The engineer looked back at the numbers. Something felt wrong. The system was not completely broken. It was worse. It was slowly becoming unstable. The kind of problem that could destroy expensive equipment if ignored. The next morning, Jared walked into the office expecting the situation to be handled. Instead, he found several managers waiting near the conference room. Their faces were serious. What happened? Jared asked. The operations manager handed him a report. We're experiencing multiple infrastructure problems. Jared scanned the pages. Why? Nobody answered. Finally, one employee quietly said, Claire would have known what to do. The room went silent. Jared looked up. Claire? The employee immediately regretted speaking. She managed these systems. Before, Jared shook his head. She was IT support. No, one corrected him. But everyone in the room knew that. Statement was wrong. Claire was never just fixing computers. She was protecting the foundation of the company. Later that day, Jared called the new infrastructure team into his office. I hired you because I was told you could handle this. One of the engineers hesitated. We can handle most of it. Most? The engineer looked uncomfortable. We're still trying to understand some of the systems. Jared leaned back. What do you mean? The engineer took a breath. Claire built a lot of the monitoring and management processes herself. For the first time, Jared had no immediate response, because he remembered something. Every time there was a major technical problem over the past 6 years, Claire had been there, quietly, quickly, without asking for credit. He had mistaken silence for lack of importance. That evening, Jared received another message. A major client had paused their upcoming contract renewal. The reason was simple. They had lost confidence in Northvale's reliability. Jared stared at the email for a long time. For the first time since firing Claire, he felt something he rarely experienced. Uncertainty. Across the city, Claire sat in her apartment, watching the rain hit the window. Her phone remained silent. She knew eventually someone would contact her, but she also knew something else. A company that only values people, after losing them, has already learned its lesson too late. By the third day after Claire Morgan left Northvale Systems, the company could no longer pretend everything was under control. The problems were no longer small. Several clients experienced service interruptions. Internal systems slowed down during peak hours. Employees started avoiding certain applications because they were afraid something would crash. The office atmosphere changed. People who once walked confidently through the halls now stopped to ask questions. What is happening? Who is handling this? Why didn't anyone know about this before? But the hardest question was the one nobody wanted to answer. Why did everything start failing after Claire left? Jared Collins spent most of the morning in emergency meetings. He hated situations he couldn't control, and this was exactly that. We need a solution, he said, looking at the operations team. We are working on it, the department manager replied. Jared's expression hardened. I don't want updates. I want results. The manager hesitated. There's something we need to explain. Jared looked up. What? The manager placed several documents on the table. Claire wasn't just maintaining the systems. Jared frowned. What does that mean? She designed many of the monitoring systems. She created the recovery process. She was also the person authorized to make certain infrastructure decisions. The room became quiet. Jared stared at the documents. That doesn't make sense. She was a contractor. Yes, the manager said, but she was not a normal contractor. For the first time, Jared realized he had never actually looked into Claire's role. He had only looked at her title, IT support, a simple label, a convenient assumption. That afternoon, Jared ordered a complete review of Claire's contract. A legal department returned several hours later with information that surprised everyone. Claire Morgan was not an employee. She was an independent infrastructure specialist. 6 years earlier, when Northvale was struggling with repeated system failures, Claire had been hired to rebuild the company's entire technical foundation. Her agreement gave her responsibility over several critical systems, not because she demanded power, because the company needed someone who understood them. Jared read the documents. Again, the woman he had dismissed in front of the entire office was the person who had helped keep the company alive. Remembered her standing in the meeting. Room, calmed, quiet, almost impossible to read. Remembered asking, "That's it? You don't want to say anything?" And her answer, "You made your decision." At the time, he thought she was simply accepting defeat. Now he wondered if she was doing something else, accepting reality. Meanwhile, Claire was building a new routine. For the first time in years, Her days were quiet. She worked from a small home office. She answered messages from companies that needed consulting help, but she refused to contact North Vale, not because she wanted revenge, because she wanted them to understand something. Respect should never come after. Desperation. That evening, Jared finally called her. The phone rang twice before Claire answered. Claire. Hello, Jared. His voice was different, less confident. I think we need to talk. Claire looked out the window. About what? There was a pause. About what happened at North Vale. Claire stayed silent. Jared continued. We didn't fully understand your role. No, Claire said calmly. You didn't. The answer bothered him because it was true. I want to fix this. Claire walked toward her desk and looked at the old laptop, bag she had carried for years. You want to fix the company. Another pause. Yes. Not. What happened? Jared had no answer, because she was right. He wanted the system back. He wanted stability. He wanted the person who could solve his problem. But he had not yet considered the person he had humiliated. Finally, Claire said, Jared, the biggest problem at North Vale was never the technology. She paused. It was believing that the people keeping everything together were the easiest people to replace. Then she ended the call. For the first time in years, Jared Collins understood something uncomfortable. The person he thought had the least power had been the one holding the most. The next morning, Jared Collins arrived at North Vale earlier than usual. For years, he had believed arriving early meant being in control. But that morning felt different. The empty office did not feel like a place he owned, and felt like a place that was slowly slipping away from him. His desk was a copy of Claire Morgan's original agreement. He had read it 3 times already, every time. He noticed something he had ignored before. Claire had never been hired as simple technical support. She had been brought in during one of the company's worst periods. 6 years earlier, North Vale had suffered repeated system failures. Major clients were leaving. Investors were losing confidence. The company needed someone who could rebuild its infrastructure from the ground up. That person was Claire. She created the monitoring systems. She redesigned the network structure. She built emergency recovery plans. But after the company recovered, her role became invisible. The better she did her job, the less people noticed it. Jared had mistaken a quiet expert for a replaceable worker. That realization bothered him more than he wanted to admit. Later that day, the board requested an emergency meeting. The directors were no longer asking why Claire had left. They were asking why nobody knew how important she was. One board member placed a report on the table. We have lost 2 clients this week, another added. Several investors are asking whether our infrastructure is stable. Jared sat silently. He wanted to defend himself. He wanted to say he was making reasonable business decisions. But every explanation sounded weaker in his own mind, because the truth was simple. He had never bothered to understand Claire's work. He only understood her position, and he had assumed position meant value. After the meeting, Jared asked the legal department for one more piece of information: Claire's current agreements. When the documents arrived, he noticed something else. Claire had options. She could have restricted access immediately after leaving. She could have caused delays. She could have made the transition extremely difficult, but she didn't. She simply walked away. That confused him. If she wanted revenge, she had the ability to create chaos. Instead, she did nothing. That was when Jared finally understood. Claire was not trying to destroy North Vale. She was letting North Vale face the consequences of its own decisions. Meanwhile, Claire received an unexpected visit. A former North Vale employee named Marcus Hill came to her small office. Marcus had worked in operations for years. He was one of the few people who understood what Claire actually did. I wanted to apologize, he said. Claire looked surprised. For what? For knowing you were doing more than people realized and never saying anything? Claire sat back. Why didn't you? Marcus looked down. Because everyone liked pretending the company was running itself. That answer stayed with her, because she knew it was true. People often ignored the person fixing problems, because admitting they needed help meant admitting they were not in control. Marcus handed her a folder. "What is this?" "Records from before I left." Claire opened it carefully. Inside were maintenance, reports, and internal emails. She quickly noticed something unusual. Several decisions had been made by executives without proper review. Important infrastructure, changes to security shortcuts, cost reductions that increased risk. Claire looked up. Who approved these? Marcus hesitated. Jared wasn't the only one. That changed everything. For the first time, Claire realized the problem at Northvale was bigger than one arrogant CEO. There was a culture inside the company, a belief that numbers mattered more than people, that efficiency mattered more than responsibility. And that belief had been growing for years. That evening, Jared called Claire again. This time his voice was different. "There's something you need to know." Claire waited. "We found issues that existed before you left." She looked at the folder on her desk. "I know." Jared became quiet. "You knew." "I suspected. Why didn't you tell us?" Claire looked at the reports. "Because nobody listened when I tried." The silence between them lasted several seconds. Then Jared asked, "What do you want?" Claire looked at the city outside her window. 6 years ago, she had helped save Northvale, but this time, she wasn't sure it deserved saving. "I want the truth," she said, "and I want to know whether Northvale is still a company worth protecting." For the first time, Jared had no argument, because he knew the answer would determine everything. The problems at Northvale Systems were no longer hidden. For weeks, executives had been able to explain away the failures. Temporary outage, a technical delay, an unexpected issue. But explanations only worked when people still believed them. The clients had started asking harder questions. Why were response times slower? Why were security systems unstable? Why did a company known for reliability suddenly seem uncertain? Jared Collins felt the pressure everywhere. Every meeting became a reminder of the same mistake. They had removed the one person who understood the company's foundation, and they had done it without even knowing her value. But the bigger problem was what Claire had discovered. The infrastructure failures were not caused only by her absence. They revealed years of poor decisions. Odd executives had approved cheaper solutions. Security updates had been delayed. Maintenance schedules had been reduced to save money. Every decision looked reasonable by itself. Together, they created a dangerous situation. Claire spent several nights reviewing the records Marcus had given her. She wasn't looking for revenge. She was looking for answers. She wanted to know whether Northvale had made one mistake, or whether the entire company had forgotten what responsibility meant. One document caught her attention. A 5-year-old proposal to upgrade the company's security system. The recommendation had been clear: upgrade immediately. The risks were explained, but the approval was denied. The reason? Too expensive. Claire leaned back in her chair. She remembered that meeting. She had warned them. Nobody listened. Because at that time, she was just the person who handled technical problems, not someone whose opinion mattered. The next day, Claire agreed to meet Jared. They sat in a quiet restaurant away from the office. For the first time, Jared looked uncomfortable around her. Not angry, not arrogant, just uncertain. "I owe you an apology," he said. Claire looked at him. "For firing me?" "Yes." "For embarrassing me?" He looked down. "Yes." She waited. The silence was difficult for him, because Jared was used to people filling silence for him. Finally, he said, "I thought I understood the company." Claire picked up her glass of water. "But you only understood the parts people showed you." He didn't argue, because again, she was right. "I need your help," Jared said. Claire looked at him carefully. "That's what everyone says after something breaks." "I know. And that's the problem." Jared looked surprised. "What do you mean?" "You don't need someone to fix a problem. You need someone to tell you why the problem happened." Jared was quiet. Claire continued. Northvale. Didn't fail because I left. She placed the documents on the table. Northvale. Failed because too many people believed important. Things could be ignored as long as everything looked fine. Jared looked at the papers. So what happens now? Claire looked out the window. I don't know yet. That answer bothered him, because for the first time, Claire wasn't waiting for instructions. She was making her own decision. Later that week, Northvale received unexpected news. A major competitor announced a partnership with a new infrastructure consultant. The name attached to the announcement was familiar Claire Morgan. The industry reacted quickly. People who had never noticed her before were suddenly interested. Technology magazines wanted interviews. Companies wanted consultations. The woman Northvale treated like an ordinary contractor had become the person everyone wanted to work with. Jared read the announcement alone in his office. The situation was no longer just about losing an employee. It was about losing trust. And Claire had something Northvale desperately needed. Not a system, not a contract, not a technical solution. Credibility. That evening, Claire received another message. This time, it was from the Northvale board. Not Jared. Not a manager. The board itself. The message was short. We would like to discuss a new arrangement. Claire stared at the screen. 6 years ago, she entered Northvale because they needed her skills. Now, they were coming back because they finally understood her value. But Claire knew one thing. Going back would not mean returning to the same place. If she stepped inside Northvale again, everything would have to change. Claire Morgan did not return to Northvale immediately. That surprised everyone. Most people expected her to accept the offer. After all, the company had finally admitted her importance. They were offering a better position, more money and more authority than she had ever received before. But Claire knew something money could not fix. Respect could not be added after someone was pushed away. It had to exist from the beginning. Instead of walking back into the office where she had been humiliated, Claire focused on building something new. She started accepting consulting projects from smaller technology companies. Companies that didn't have massive budgets. Companies where leaders still listened when someone warned them about problems. Her first major client was a growing healthcare technology company called BrightPath Solutions. Their system was not failing yet, but Claire noticed weaknesses. Immediately, the security structure was outdated. The backup system was unreliable. The employees were making decisions based on speed instead of long-term stability. Claire explained everything during her first meeting. The CEO, Melissa Grant, listened carefully. After the presentation, Melissa asked, "How long have you been seeing these problems?" Claire answered honestly, "Years. And people ignored you?" Claire gave a small smile. Sometimes people don't ignore the problem. They ignore the person who points it out. Melissa understood, because she had seen the same thing happen in her own company. Within 3 months, BrightPath systems became stronger. The company expanded. Clients trusted them more, and Claire's reputation grew. The same people who once called her IT support were now reading articles about her work. At Northvale, Jared watched everything change. The board had not fired him, but his position was weaker. Every decision was questioned. Every meeting included discussions about what went wrong. The company that once moved quickly now moved carefully. One afternoon, Jared met with the board. "We need Claire back," one director said. Jared remained silent, because he knew bringing Claire back was no longer about technology. It was about admitting the company had failed her. That evening, Jared called Claire. She answered, after a few rings. "I expected this call eventually," she said. Jared sighed. "I know." There was a pause. "I want to meet," Claire agreed. They met in a quiet park near the city. No conference room, no executives, no employees watching, just 2 people. "I was wrong about you," Jared said. Claire looked at him. "That's not easy for you to say." "No." He smiled slightly. "But it's true." For the first time, Jared wasn't trying to sound powerful. He sounded tired. "I thought leadership meant having all the answers." Claire listened. "I thought if someone wasn't visible, They weren't important. He looked away. That was my mistake. Claire appreciated the honesty. But honesty did not erase consequences. Jared, the problem was never that you didn't know my title. She paused. The problem was that you never cared enough to know my contribution. He nodded slowly. I understand that now. Maybe he did. Maybe he didn't. Claire had learned something important. People could apologize, but change was proven through actions. Before they left, Jared asked, "What would it take for you to help Northvale?" Claire looked at him. "A different company." He frowned. "What?" "A company where people don't have to become important after they leave." Jared had no answer, because that was exactly what Northvale needed to become. Later that night, Claire received another message. This one was from Nathan Brooks, an investor who had followed her recent work. He wanted to discuss a partnership, not employment, not a contract, a partnership. Claire looked at the message for a long time. 6 months earlier, she had walked away from Northvale with nothing but her laptop and her dignity. Now, companies were asking for her expertise, but she also knew something. The story with Northvale was not finished, because the biggest problem was never the systems, it was the people who controlled them, and soon, those people would have to decide whether they were ready to change. The Northvale board meeting lasted almost 4 hours. Nobody left early. Nobody checked their phones. The situation had become too serious. The company was facing financial pressure, unhappy clients, and a damaged reputation, but the biggest concern was not the technology, was trust. A board member placed a report on the table. We lost 3 major contracts because clients believe we are unstable. Another director looked at Jared. How did we not know one person had so much influence over our infrastructure? Jared had heard that question many times, and every time, the answer became more uncomfortable, because the company did not fail to understand Claire's role. The company chose not to understand. After the meeting, the board made a decision. They wanted Claire Morgan back, but this time, they would not offer her the same position. They wanted her as a strategic partner, someone with authority, someone whose opinion could not be ignored. Jared was responsible for delivering the offer, and he knew this conversation would be different from their previous ones. A year ago, Claire would have been the person sitting across from him asking for recognition. Now, he was the one asking for a chance. They met at the same coffee shop where Claire had received his first desperate call. Jared noticed that detail. Maybe Claire did too. "I have an offer," Jared said. Claire listened. "Northvale wants you to return." She looked at him calmly. "As what?" "Not an employee." He placed the documents on the table. "Partner. Infrastructure advisor. A seat in leadership discussions." Claire looked through the papers. The offer was generous. More authority than she had ever requested. More respect than she had ever received. But she closed the folder. "I'm not interested." Jared looked surprised. "Why?" "Because you still think the problem was my position." He frowned. "What do you mean?" "You think changing my title fixes everything." Claire looked directly at him. "It doesn't." Jared was quiet. She continued. "If I come back, I don't want a better title. I want a different environment." "What kind?" "One where people can speak before something breaks." Jared listened carefully. No more ignoring. "Warnings because they are inconvenient." She paused. "No more treating technical teams like they are invisible." For the first time, Jared understood the size of the change she was asking for. She was not asking for power. She was asking for responsibility. A week later, Northvale announced major changes, new review procedures, more authority for technical departments. Independent oversight employees were encouraged to report concerns without fear. Some executives resisted. They believed Claire was demanding too much. But the board supported her, because they finally understood the cost of ignoring the people who protected the company. Not everyone accepted the changes. Victoria Hale, the former operations director, was especially unhappy. She had spent years benefiting from the old system, a system where certain voices mattered more than others. She met Claire outside the building. "You realize you're changing everything," Victoria said. Claire nodded. "That's the point," Victoria crossed her arms. "People like you always think you can fix companies." Claire looked at her. "No." She paused. "I think companies fix themselves. When people finally admit what is broken." Victoria had no response, because deep down, she knew Claire was right. Over the next few months, Northvale slowly recovered. Not because of one person, because people finally started listening. Claire continued working with the company, but she kept her independence. She no longer wanted to be the person quietly holding everything together. She wanted to build systems where everything didn't depend on one person. One evening, Jared sent her a message, "Thank you." Claire read it, but didn't answer immediately. She thought about the woman who had walked out of Northvale months earlier, the woman who felt invisible. She was still the same person. But she finally understood something. Being underestimated was painful, but it was also revealing, because sometimes people only show their true value after someone decides they have none. And now, Northvale had one final challenge, not rebuilding its systems, rebuilding its trust. The changes at Northvale Systems were not easy. Changing. Technology was simple compared to changing people. New system could be installed in weeks. New culture could take years. Claire Morgan knew that from the beginning. She had spent her career fixing problems that nobody wanted to admit existed. And now she was facing the biggest one, the company's mindset. Some employees welcomed the changes. For the first time, engineers felt their opinions mattered. People who had stayed quiet for years started speaking during meetings. They reported risks earlier. They questioned decisions. They stopped pretending everything was fine. But some executives were uncomfortable. They missed the old days. The days when decisions were made quickly. Because only a few people had a voice. One of those people was Daniel Foster, a senior executive who had worked at Northvale for more than a decade. He approached Jared after a leadership meeting. "This is becoming a problem." Jared looked at him. "What is?" "Claire." Jared stayed silent. Daniel continued, "She is changing how this company works." Jared looked through the office. "Windows? That's exactly what needed to happen." Daniel shook his head. "You're letting her take control." Jared turned around. "No," he paused. "We are finally giving people responsibility." That answer surprised Daniel, because Jared was no longer defending his old way of leading. He was admitting it was wrong. Meanwhile, Claire discovered something unexpected. The problems at Northvale were deeper than she originally thought. During an internal review, she found several old agreements that had never been properly evaluated. Some contracts benefited certain executives more than the company itself. The information was not illegal, but it revealed something uncomfortable. For years, decisions were made based on personal interests instead of long-term stability. Claire brought the information to the board. She expected resistance. Instead, the board asked a simple question. What do we need to change? That was the moment Claire realized something important. Maybe the company could actually become different. Not perfect, but better. A month later, Northvale held its annual leadership meeting. In the past, these meetings were filled with numbers. Revenue, growth, market share. This time, Claire stood in front of the company and spoke about something else, responsibility. A company is not protected by its buildings, she said. Not by its software. She looked around the room. It is protected by the people willing to tell the truth before things fall apart. The room was silent, because everyone understood the meaning behind those words, including Jared. After the meeting, Jared found Claire near the elevator. You know, he said, 6 months ago I thought losing you was a technical problem. Claire waited. Now, I realize it was a leadership problem. She nodded. That's an important difference. Jared smiled slightly. I'm still learning. Claire looked at him. That's probably the first honest thing you've said in years. They both laughed. It was not a friendship, not yet, but it was something they never had. Before respect that evening, Claire received an email from Brightpath Solutions. They wanted to expand their partnership. They were offering her a larger role in designing technology systems for multiple companies. Was exactly the kind of opportunity she had once thought was impossible. A year earlier, she was sitting alone at a desk while people ignored her. Now, companies were asking for her advice before problems appeared. But Claire knew success was not about proving Jared wrong. It was not about making anyone regret underestimating her. The biggest victory was simpler. She no longer needed anyone else to decide whether she mattered. Later that night, she returned to her apartment and placed her old work badge into a drawer. She kept it. Not because she missed Northvale, because it reminded her of something. There was a time when she thought being invisible meant being powerless. She was wrong. Sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one who understands everything, and sometimes the person everyone overlooks is the person they eventually cannot replace. 1 year after Claire Morgan walked away from Northvale Systems, the company looked completely different. The same building, stood in the same place, the same employees, walked through the same doors, but the atmosphere had changed. People talked more openly, problems were discussed before they became emergencies, and decisions were no longer made by only the loudest voices in the room. But rebuilding trust was never easy. Some damage took longer to repair, especially the damage caused by years of people feeling ignored. Claire understood that better than anyone. She had spent 6 years watching her work disappear behind a simple job title. Now, she was sitting at the leadership table, not because someone finally gave her permission, because she had earned a place there. But just when Northvale started moving forward, a new challenge appeared. A major investor questioned whether the company's new direction was worth the cost. The investor wanted faster results, more cuts, higher short-term profits, the same thinking that had created problems before. During the emergency board meeting, several executives supported the investor. "We need to show stronger numbers," one executive said. Claire listened quietly, then she opened a folder. Inside were the results. From the past year, client retention had increased. System failures had dropped, employee turnover had decreased. The company was healthier. It just was not growing through shortcuts anymore. "This is what stability looks like," Claire said. "We spent years pretending quick decisions were always smart decisions." She looked around the room. They were only quick, because nobody wanted to deal with the consequences. The room became silent. The investor challenged her. "And what makes you think your approach is better?" Claire answered calmly. "Because I have seen what happens when people ignore the warning signs." Nobody needed her to explain. Everyone remembered, including Jared. After the meeting, the board supported Claire's plan. The investor chose not to continue the partnership. It was a risk, a serious one. But for the first time, Northvale chose long-term survival over immediate approval. Later that evening, Jared met Claire outside the office. The city lights reflected on the glass buildings around them. "You won," he said. Claire looked confused. "Won what?" "The argument. The company. Everything." She shook her head. "No." Jared looked at her. "No, I didn't win." She looked back at the building. Northvale finally stopped fighting the truth. Jared smiled. "That sounds like something only you would say." Claire laughed softly. A year earlier, she never imagined standing there with him, not because they had become close friends. They hadn't. Some things could not be erased, but they had reached something better than pretending, understanding. Before they separated, Jared stopped her. "There's something I never said." Claire waited. "I'm sorry, not a business apology. Not an apology because the company needed her, a real one, for making you feel invisible." Claire was quiet for a moment. Then she nodded. "Thank you, that was enough. Not because the past disappeared, because it no longer controlled her." That night, Claire returned home and opened her laptop. There were dozens of messages. Waiting. Companies asking for advice. Organizations wanting her expertise. People who once ignored her now wanted to learn from her. But Claire closed the computer. She made dinner, called a friend, and enjoyed a quiet evening because she had learned the most important lesson. A person's value does not increase when others finally recognize it. It was always there. The world just needed time to notice. And somewhere inside Northvale Systems, people were finally understanding the truth. The woman they once thought was replaceable was the reason they had a future at all. 2 years after leaving Northvale Systems, Claire Morgan still remembered. The day she walked out of the building, she remembered the weight of her laptop bag. She remembered the silence after Jared Collins told her the decision was final. She remembered how strange it felt to realize that 6 years of dedication could disappear in a single conversation. At the time, she thought she had lost everything. Her position, her reputation inside the company, the place where she had spent most of her professional life. But looking back, Claire understood something different. She had not lost herself. She had finally found herself. Her consulting company had grown steadily. Not overnight. Not through luck. Through years of experience, patience, and the trust she built with people who valued her work. She hired a small team of engineers. But unlike Northvale's old system, Claire built her company around one simple idea. No, one should become invisible just because they work quietly. Every employee had a voice. Every concern was considered. Every warning mattered. One afternoon, Claire walked through her new office. It was smaller than Northvale's headquarters. There were no expensive decorations, no impressive lobby, no executives trying to look powerful. Just people working together, and somehow it felt more successful, because everyone inside understood why they were there. That evening, Claire received an invitation from Northvale. The company was celebrating its recovery. They wanted her to speak at the event. For a moment, she hesitated. Part of her wondered if returning would bring back old feelings, but another part of her knew something important. She was no longer the woman who left that building. She agreed. The night of the event, Claire walked into Northvale's main hall, the same place where she had once been publicly dismissed. But this time, people greeted her differently. Employees thanked her. Former coworkers told her how much had changed. One young engineer approached her. "I heard stories about how things used to be." Claire smiled. "Stories?" He laughed. "Yes. About how nobody listened until everything broke." Claire looked around the room. That happens more often than people think. During her speech, Claire did not talk about revenge. She did not talk about proving anyone wrong. Instead, she talked about responsibility. Companies are built by people, she said. Not just executives, not just investors. Everyone. She paused. And when we stop seeing the people who keep things running, we create problems bigger than any technology can solve. The room was quiet, because everyone understood. After the event, Jared found her outside. They stood near the entrance where she had once walked away. "I never thought I would see this place change," he said. Claire smiled. "Neither did I." Jared looked at the building. "I used to think being in charge meant having the most power. And now?" He thought for a moment. "Now I think it means knowing when to listen." Claire nodded. That was the answer she had. Hoped he would eventually find. Not because she wanted him to suffer, because real change was better than punishment. Before leaving, Claire looked back one more time. The building was still there. The memories were still there. But they no longer hurt. They were simply part of her story. On the drive home, Claire stopped at a red light and looked at her reflection in the window. For years, she had measured her worth by how useful she was to others. Now, she knew something different. Her value was never created by a company, never created by a title, never created by someone else's approval. It had always been there. The world just needed time to recognize it. And sometimes the greatest comeback is not making the people who underestimated you regret losing you. It is building a life where you no longer need them to understand your worth.